All right, why don't we kick it off? Thanks everyone for joining. It's obviously a crazy time in the world, and I hope you're all staying safe and sane. And there's no good segue out of that, so I will just move us over to a Amundsen conversation. We have a great group of people joining today with a lot of interesting work that's happening in a lot of organizations. So this is our community meeting where we get to share some of the developments that are happening, talk about open topics, and we will also leave some open-ended room for discussion towards the end. If you have anything you want to share or add, feel free to use the chat box for questions or comments. Cool. So without further ado, we can start with our first topic for the day, which was Amundsen today actually has tables indexed in it. And there's been some work that ING has thought about, that Lyft has thought about around adding dashboards. And other companies have thought about this, about adding dashboards to Amundsen. So Lyft has done some work that we wanted to demo to you all and get your feedback. And I believe Daniel's gonna demo dashboards in Amundsen.
Hey, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, yes. Cool. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is a new feature that we've been working on. I know we've talked about it quite extensively before, but it's almost here. So it's currently in our beta stage, and this is Amundsen dashboards. So for example, on the home screen, you'll see that we have a datasets tab and a dashboards tab for bookmarks. So you can see these are some dashboards that I've bookmarked. Then you can search for them here. So you see there's datasets and then dashboards below that over here. Right now, we are only indexing mode dashboards, but we have tentative plans to index other products as well. So here we have each of the results. There is the space or the group of the report, and then this is the name of the report itself. And then we have the last successful run date here. Then I'm switching tabs here to another report. This is one that we've picked to be quote unquote non-sensitive data. So here's the dashboard page. The first thing you'll notice is on the right side, you'll see the list of tables that are used by the query. Sorry, all right. Sorry, Jorn, you had a little bit of echo. I muted you for a sec. And then there's a list of queries here. We have just the query names for now, but we have plans to expand to add other things such as the full query text. On the left side here, there's a description. We've chosen to have this as non-editable because you can easily edit the description in mode. And clicking on this open dashboard button will take you there. Then we have some basic information such as the owner, when the report was created, when it was last run, and also when it was last successfully run. Last updated is like when it was edited, and then a view count from the last 90 days. And then below that, we have an actual preview image. We have plans to kind of make this clickable and have it expand so you can actually read the data here. And then we also have plans to kind of link the tables back to the dashboards, as well as having the dashboards linked to the tables. So you can find your favorite tables and say what work has been produced on these tables, what analysis has been done. So you should be able to see them there. We don't have that yet, but that's something that we plan to do shortly. We also have the ability to edit tags here, and we can visit the dashboard. So that'll open up in a new tab. Finally, we have some updates to the profile page where we've combined all of the data sets in your profile to one tab, and then they're listed horizontally or vertically, and then there's a dashboard tab as well. Yep. Any questions?
I think one other thing that would be cool is to talk a little bit about the architecture updates that we had to do behind it. And Jin, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So architecture is like the same as what we did on table, but a little bit different on the dashboard side is most of the dashboard vendors, they don't like expose their database that store their metadata. They usually expose the API. So what we introduce on here is we introduce something called REST API query in Data Builder. Basically is generic REST API interface that you can talk to any REST API. And one good thing about this is you can join multiple REST API to make it like to get the data set you want. And we also normalize the model of the dashboard. For example, like we have separate for the table metadata all has most of the data set inside a model, but we basically separate it out for the mode dashboard. The reason on this is because every vendor has different way to represent their data. Even we do support capacity of joining. It will be a little bit hard to combine everything in one place. So what the hope is, the reason that we did is although we show the mode dashboard as our showcase because we chose to do it first, but we didn't think about mode as the only dashboard that we're gonna support. We skimmed through like Tableau dashboard to see whether it can be done. People can easily contribute Tableau dashboard to us, and it seems it's very doable. So we are hoping that open source community start contributing to us. I will be planning to add documentation about how to do the ingestion and where's the extension point on like for other vendors. So yeah, we are hoping for more contribution to add more vendors of dashboard. That's pretty much it.
Just a quick follow-up question. Is that documentation that you mentioned going to contain the details of how you integrated with mode, like which mode APIs you're interacting with and things like that?
That's a good question. That's actually inside the code, but I can also specify which API is using as well.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
And Christina, you all use mode at iRobot as well, right?
We do. So definitely very interested in being able to try this out against our mode instance and see how it goes.
Yeah. So if I expect most of things will be the same as Lyft for mode users. So for us, the only thing that you need to do with on the mode side will be like providing access token and organization code. Other than that, is same as other table configuration. It's just passing more information, what kind of model that you want to build, and I will like provide the detail of that in the documentation.
That would be great.
I think there's a little bit of peculiarity around getting the usage data and connections between the dashboards and the tables. Jin, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, good point. One thing about the usage is mode only provide the accumulated usage. So, but what we need in Amundsen is we want to bring recency, because like if some dashboard was popular like 2-3 years ago, there's no way that is relevant for us, right? So what we did is basically we still pull that information, but we push that into our data warehouse in Hive, and then basically we are taking snapshot of absolute values, and then have another data builder work to get the data, delta data from Hive using Presto, and then push to Neo4j. That part is like the part that pushed to Hive is internal, but everything else is open source. So I expect like most of the company already have that kind of feature. So the way that we use this is basically same as all the other services push their data into data warehouse. So that connection part is open sourced, but like the implementation, how to push to warehouse is closed. So I expect most of company could adopt the same way. Other than that, there's a part also coming out with, like Daniel demoed. There's a list of tables that we list on dashboard. That feature is not from Mode, but it's actually from our data infra team that basically when they audit the query, they also listed the table that is being used in this query. I believe they put some callback method in Hive to figure that out. So we didn't parse the SQL, but that's something that is internal to Lyft. So we just queried that table to push to our graph. So that is something that we were not able to open source that because that lives in our Lyft infrastructure. But we same as table, we all open source the interface. So if you already have those kind of infrastructure, you can still surface that. Any question about the architecture or ingestion?
Would you have any guess on how much effort there would be in building this for a different visualization tool?
You mean like how easy it will be integrated with others?
Yeah, for Tableau or something.
Yeah,
What would the effort be?
Yeah, basically as long as is supporting REST API, normalized REST API, it will be easy. I expect it will be not hard because like if you look at the code, is actually we didn't expose anything about mode in the core part. It's just like when we connect to the mode, there's a implementation specific to mode and then surface into the interface, which I mentioned what we call as REST API query. So as long as they follow the REST API convention, like either HTTP method with a JSON payload, it should be easy. One technology that we use here is like for HTTP call, we just use a Python HTTP request. The other part that we used was JSON parser. Basically, that's like a XML path for JSON. So basically, that's two method technology that we utilize on this. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, cool.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions before we move on to the next topic?
I just want to add, this is really awesome. I am really excited about this. Michelle from iRobot and the next person anyways, I think. But Christina and I have taken a look at some of the, Mode API and what it would take to integrate. And we are just like crazy excited that you guys did this. And we want it as soon as possible. So
Awesome.
One thing Daniel could add, I'm not sure Daniel mentioned or not, but for Mode, on their API, they have a limitation that they don't expose the personal spaces. So we were only able to surface share space report. So we have a plan to announce our users, communicate with users to move their report to share space. Yeah, that's one caveat. Somehow our left most of their report is in private space. So if iRobot is the same, probably you need to also communicate with the user as well.
Yeah, it would be great to kind of know if this is a problem specific to Lyft or if this is a greater issue that is just like across the industry or among users of Mode. And
yeah, I think
aside from the technical challenge of not being able to access the personal spaces from the API, there is the other question is like, should we even access those? Because there's a lot of like scrapbooking and work in progress, and then mixed in with like shareable, like refined reports, and we wouldn't want to pollute kind of the searchable space with like all of this garbage as mixed in as well. So we have to we have to convince all of our users to migrate, which is kind of a painful process.
Cool. Well, why don't we move on to the next topic? Michelle, you have the floor.
All right, let me see if I can share my screen. Sorry, I'm gonna have to give Google Chrome permission to see things.
All good.
1 second. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now? See me now?
Yep.
Chrome decided to reboot when I granted it permission. So. Always fun. All right. So I'm going to share with you guys today, and hopefully you're still seeing the presentation mode.
Yeah. Yes, we are.
We are.
Yeah. I wanted to share with you guys today a little bit more on sort of the implementation and rollout of Amundsen at iRobot. Less focused on the technical side. Christina's on the phone. She's the technical lead for Amundsen at iRobot. So she can answer some questions if there's any follow-ups in terms of sort of how we've implemented. But some of these slides I've actually taken from our internal launch and presentation of Amundsen. And so sort of wanted to talk through, what we've done, how we've got buy-in from our organization to do this, and some of the successes and learnings that we've had so far. So I'm Michelle Goulin. I'm the manager of data analytics at iRobot. I also sort of serve as the sponsor or internal PM to Amundsen at iRobot. And Christina, as I mentioned, is the tech lead. So if you're not familiar with iRobot, we're the makers of Roomba, robotic vacuums, and Brava, robotic mops. And we have millions of connected products. We have users internally like data scientists, engineers, product managers, and business stakeholders who need data to do their jobs and to build awesome things for our customers. So this probably looks familiar to most folks. I think I borrowed the questions on the left from Lyft, but in order to use data effectively in their roles, people need to understand where it exists, what prior work has been done, what's really the source of truth. We also did an internal survey back in, I want to say, the fall of 2019 to understand for those users what are some of their major pain points in finding, using data, to successfully drive insights or build products. And 57% of our R&D organization said just awareness and definitions would help help them get what they need. And 65% wanted some sort of endorsement or warning from a data expert, as well as 70% needing, documentation in order to trust that data. And so when we were looking at this problem within our organization, we found Amundsen as an open source project, and we thought that our problems aligned really well with the solution that the Lyft folks were building, in that it makes data discoverable. I think number one, it is it takes a lot of the manual effort out of. So we've built it in a way that things are indexed automatically from our data platform, and that it also is very collaborative by nature. So that missing element of how do we capture institutional knowledge, how do we bring that all together in one place, and how do we engage people to connect the experts who've been using data, with people who are new, who are onboarding, who are using something for the first time. So this is actually how we've presented Amundsen to iRobot. it's a metadata-driven application. I think most folks here know that, but we wanted to highlight, this is what we tell iRoboteers, what they can do and how they can use Amundsen. I'll keep going. And then this is it. So this is, I think, the original UI. Right now, we're actually working on implementing the new UI and search functionality. So we haven't released that to our production environments yet. But I think this will look very familiar to everyone, just with the iRobot logo there and some of our data sets. And then when we dive into the details page, so a single data asset, some of our focus areas have been on enhancing the table metadata so that folks can use it more easily at iRobot. So some of the things that we've added, which I think were specific, are things like table size and record count, as well as date created, updated, and date range. And I think some of these things are actually in the new UI. So we're working on sort of merging our changes and making sure things work together. The other thing that we've added is preview capability for our analytics tool, which is Mode, I think, as we've talked about, we've set up basically sample reports where users can click in and preview that data, only if they're authorized to view it. So I think this is maybe where it'll be most interesting to you all. So we launched Amundsen in December of 2019. We've had a pretty rapid adoption by data teams. And I have a quote from one of our data scientists there at the bottom, basically lamenting that she started 3 years ago and this didn't exist when she started. And she had to spend months sort of digging through data, understanding who was an expert, who to talk to about this field or that table, and is basically super psyched that this exists now for her. We are averaging, in terms of sort of Amundsen usage and adoption, we see about 20 searches a day through the tool. And in the 5 or 6 months that this has been available, we've had over 600 edits to owners' descriptions and tags. So some of the most common feedback we've gotten from our users is that search results are pretty broad. So we have, I think, a few hundred tables maybe that are indexed. And we, when someone searches something pretty general, they get a lot of search results. So we're thinking about, ways to make that more useful. I think some of the new search experience will be helpful for narrowing down results. We also, I think there's a component of, missing descriptions. So we did a lot of work up front to add a lot of our documentation to Amundsen, but we're, continuously iterating and have new data. So we need to keep up with that. And we need a better way to track what's missing and get that available to people. And then I think for the most power data users, they want even more metadata. Which I think is probably a common theme. So some of the things that we've learned are that data scientists are the primary group adding and editing content. So we see a lot of folks, engineers, product managers, et cetera, engage with the tool, but we'd like to see more engineers adding content in terms of descriptions. As I mentioned, we want a better process to request and manage those descriptions. And then we really need indexing dashboards. So we're really excited to reach business users. So this has sort of been more of a niche tool, I would say, for the data teams and for certain subsets of engineers. But if we want to sort of reach beyond that and make data discovery available to everyone in the company, we really need to be able to meet them where they are. They're the ones using dashboards. They're looking at what final insight has been presented to them, and we want to make that available. So in terms of what we've done and what we've looked at, this is again something that we presented internally, that we're leveraging the open source community, aligning with industry leaders in terms of implementing Amundsen. We are working on developing or implementing the new UI that Lyft folks have released. And then we want dashboards next. Did I mention that? And then we're also really interested in things like PII tagging that I think the Square team has talked about a lot, lineage, and version tracking as well. So I think this is relevant for both dashboards and tables. I think someone on the Lyft team was talking about sort of freshness of dashboards. We want to make sure that's true for tables as well. So showing things like when tables or columns have been deprecated is something that we're evaluating, working in next. And then, as I mentioned, we've done some customizations for iRobot's needs. A lot of that has been, implementing for our data platform specifically. We're an AWS shop. So that was a lot of the upfront work, and we've got it working. We've had it up and running for 6 months, and yeah, that's kind of everything I had to share.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
Perhaps I can moderate the questions, and folks have
Sure.
questions, they can just put it on the chat. There's a lot of people here.
Okay.
So Luis Guzman asked, how are folks going about filling in the gaps in the metadata and description? Any experience trying to crowdsource it?
Yeah, so I would say we've done a lot of work to communicate within, the folks who are using data at iRobot that Amundsen is the tool that they should be using to input those descriptions. I think it works a lot more effectively for the people who are also then using data, right? They see sort of that relationship where if they add something, they have a piece of knowledge or they created a new field that they should contribute. I think where it's a little bit more challenging is maybe folks who are upstream in the data collection or data creation process. They're not necessarily going in and trying to use the data, so they don't see that that's missing. We want to, Mark, I can't remember, have you guys released, I remember at least in the roadmap, there were some features that you had about like requesting descriptions. Have you guys released that yet?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we have released a feature where you can request descriptions either on the table descriptions or the column descriptions. So basically you click a button, a modal pops up, it pre-fills the to field with the owners of the table, and then you can put in a custom like subject or description about what you want specifically to be filled out. And then when you click send, it'll shoot off an email. But there's a little bit of like customization work that you need to do there to like connect an email sender and things like that.
Yeah, I think we would, that's something that's definitely of interest to us as well. One of the things that we've done is just basically have one of our developers pull, what's the list of everything that is null for a description, and then I'll review and sort of reach out to owners. We want to automate that a little bit more so I can just like run a report or have that delivered so I can see everything that is missing all summarized, but we would also like to sort of have that individual capability as well.
Yeah, so cool. One of the comments I'd like to point out is like, how do you keep your code base up to date, and what kind of struggles do you come up with there, especially with all your customizations on top of it?
Christina, do you want to take that one?
Sure. It is definitely a struggle. When we first started working with Amundsen, we actually took a fork of the code base so that we could do our customizations. We are now in the process of trying to pull in all of the changes that have been made since, one of the largest ones being the new search experience and Amundsen 2.0. So we're working on that now. We're also working on what the new process is going to be with pulling in changes. We've discussed things like at the start of each sprint, going in and seeing what has been changed in the remote, auditing the changes and deciding whether we're going to pull them in, just so that we can do that on a more frequent basis. But there definitely has been some work, even just in pulling in the new UI and Amundsen 2.0 with trying to rebuild some of the customizations that we made so that they are consistent with the new experience.
Yeah. Is there anything that we can do as the Amundsen team to like make that process easier for you?
Nothing comes top of mind. I think one of the things that could be interesting is there's so many communication channels with like GitHub issues, with Slack. So like when something new and large has been like a new feature has been released, what is the right communication channel for us to subscribe to see things like, oh, that request descriptions feature is now available for anyone who wants to pull in their code base, or when the dashboard feature launches, how are you planning to communicate to the broader community that development is done, it's now available for anyone who needs to pull in changes. So I think just a little bit more communication from the community about new thing available, pull stuff down would be beneficial.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Why don't we take that offline? Maybe we can talk about on Slack later on and how we can make that happen. I want to ask one more question. I think Marius has something that was already answered. So last question from Adam was, how are you capturing usage metrics?
Christina implemented that, so maybe she wants to talk to that.
It's actually leveraging the action logger that was already part of Amundsen. So there are certain, the Lyft folks can probably speak a little bit more about this, but there's a action logging annotation that actually captures method calls in the front end. So we just made a few customizations to that and are using that to track the usage events of interest.
And then we actually ingest that usage data into our data platform where we can analyze it with our own analytics tools. So sort of meta-analysis of metadata.
Yeah. Folks, in the interest of time, thank you, Christina and Michelle, for sharing iRobot's implementation. In the interest of time, we'll move. And if you have any further questions, you can always ping them on Slack. Cool. So next up is Sam, who's going to talk about the integration with their data quality system, but more focused on how they're using programmatic descriptions in Amundsen to leverage that.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Let me share my screen. All right, can everybody see this Google Doc?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name is Sam, and I'm actually a data engineer at Edmunds.com. And like Mark said, I'm going to be talking about Amundsen data quality integration with programmatic descriptions. Unfortunately, I could not get cleared to show a more interesting table in Amundsen. So I do have some pictures on this Google Doc, and I do have a boring table to show you guys. But yeah, so a little bit of a bummer there. So starting first, just a very high-level overview of data quality at Edmunds. It's going to be mostly just a black box. I didn't work on the system. It is unfortunately a closed source tool, at least currently. It's called InfoSight.
Hey, Sam, could I request you to do full screen?
Oh, yeah, sure. Let's see.
Thank you.
Is that better? Or do you need me to zoom in a little bit more?
No, this is good.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a closed source tool, at least for right now. And it's kind of it's in production, but it's kind of like in a beta stage still. Just the back end has been finished. We don't have a front end yet for configuration of metrics, reports, etc. I'll expand on that in just a second. It supports both pushing and async polling of data collections or data sets, but it's more geared towards the latter. So just to give like a very high level overview of what the flow would be for somebody who wants to add some instrumentation to a data set, it would be that they would identify a data set, they would create what we call a metric, which if it's a SQL-based table, it would be a query. And then this would be configured with a cron string as to when they want to query it. Again, you can do push or trigger-based, but for the most part, it's based off of time. This would store metric values in a time series database, and then you would define some sort of tests on top of those metric values. This could be as complicated as a custom machine learning algorithm, or it could be something as simple as more just basic descriptive statistics, like variance from the mean. And that would work on a configurable amount of history. I think the default's about 30 days. And that will flag whether or not there's an anomaly. And then the final point of configuration is reports. Obviously, we got to figure out how we should triage any identified issues. So there's aggregation of tests, where they should be sent, The means, we use commonly Slack and email for that. So yeah, those are all the configurable points. But as you can imagine, what this means is that we have this system that has some very useful metadata about tables, like whether or not a table is actually healthy on any given day, and as well as some history of anomalies that would be great to visualize. And one of our goals is we'd like Amundsen to be the single source of metadata at the org. So we want to make sure it's at least integrated with Amundsen. Maybe Amundsen will just redirect to different pages on our internal tool at some point down the road. But yeah, that was kind of the goal. So the first step in order to do that, though, was there was a missing piece of the puzzle, and that was some sort of automated table description ingestion, which didn't exist at the time. And this became known as programmatic descriptions. So just a brief segue into that. So what are they? They are table-level free-form text metadata that are generally is going to originate from an automated source. You can see here's the Neo4j query. And in this case, there's one table and there's three beautiful programmatic descriptions. Interestingly, they were implemented in a way such that a normal table description is actually just a special case of a programmatic description. But yeah, they're created in the same way. I'll show you in just a second. You can have an arbitrary number of programmatic descriptions per table. They are not editable. They are unique per a field called description source. They can actually be ordered by that in the front end. You can look at the front end documentation for more details there. And they can also be affiliated with programmatic tags. And I'll show you what that means in a second. This is an example of what one would look like here. Obviously, iRobot demonstrated that some of this is actually very generalizable and probably would be best as an explicit feature in the UI. But for various reasons, we just put it in a single blob for the time being. How do you create them? So you use the same sort of creation logic as you would for a normal description, but the key is that you specify a description source. And once you do that, it is then a programmatic description. And then in terms of the tags, you can actually specify a tag that's affiliated with a programmatic description. It could be a sequence of them. So an example is, let's say you're doing some S3 scraping to try to get size and cost of a particular table. Maybe it has some logic where if it's past a certain threshold, you tag it as expensive. So that's an example of that. So when would you use them? So you definitely are going to want to use them if you have an authoritative source of metadata that lives outside of Amundsen. In other words, you don't want it to be editable in Amundsen for various reasons. And obviously, there's a lot of complexity involved if you have multiple places that are in charge of writing. So it's not worth the complexity. And so that's a great use case for this. Obviously, so more things need to be true because that's here, just look below. There's some metadata that is very business specific. And if it is so business specific such that it wouldn't ever make sense to generalize, that would be another good use case here because it might, unless you want to customize Amundsen yourself, it probably won't make sense to actually contribute it back to the open source tool. Another possibility is that maybe it is generalizable, but it's just a POC that you're working on. You need it ASAP. This is a very quick and easy integration that you can use out of the box. So that might be another reason why you would go down this path. When would you not use them? And this came up in the merge requests about this feature, and I definitely agree with this. So if this is something like a great example would be table size that is very general. Every company could benefit from this. This would actually be better served as an explicit integration with the UI and into the data model, rather than just leveraging this sort of blob store that we have going with programmatic descriptions. And then obviously any case where you need humans to edit the data in the UI. Some example integrations. So we are using it for admin specific table level statistics, S3 scraping. We're interestingly using it for legal restrictions. And this is a case where it actually is human editable data, but we only wanted the legal team in charge of editing that data. And maybe in the future, there'll be a way to limit permissions in Amundsen itself, but that obviously doesn't exist right now. So we leverage this feature to achieve that, but it's still very much in a beta mode. And then finally, data quality, which I'll show you in just a second. And yeah, this is the boring table with it. Again, and I'll talk about the data quality stuff in a second. But you can see here, anything below this is read-only programmatic descriptions. So all those sections are that. Okay, so integration with data quality. So there's a lot of different pieces of metadata that we can get from the tool. We wanted to prioritize what we thought was the most important. The first of which is something we call health badges, which is one of the pain points that our clients have is they don't want to have to QA the data in order to determine whether or not the data set is good to use. They want to have a clear indication of the health of the data, if you will. So we came up with this traffic light system. And you can kind of see, here's the pictures down below, and here's what they mean. So green, it means it's good to go. No anomalies or issues were found. Yellow, there were possible anomalies found, but none of the tests were flagged as high confidence. Obviously, false positives and false negatives are a problem. So it might not always make sense to flag something as unusable just because something does fire. And then red, it means the data set should not be used until further notice. And then finally, unfortunately, as you can imagine, we have a lot of data sets that do not have any metrics or tests set up. So they just don't have any information. So that's what that looks like. And we decided to use kind of like a GitHub style badge format because we're working with Markdown here. And it obviously means that there's no updates needed to Amundsen to keep it in sync. It'll just reflect whatever changes are made when the tests are rerun or the data is rerun. Interestingly, we could have actually opted to put this into the editable description, the human editable description. But for various reasons, we decided it would be better to keep it in a InfoSight or data quality dedicated section, just so that it's easier to modify anything if anything changes in the future, and also add different things in a single place. Yeah, so that's what it looks like. You can see here. So this, again, this is a very dumb table, unfortunately, but you can see that we have a health status of good. And if you click on it, it'll take you to some more information. Right now, it's just JSON, but in the future, hopefully that'll be a more fancy UI. The other thing we wanted to add was charts so that people can actually see some context around the badges. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to know exactly maybe what is going on. For each of the tests, there is going to be a chart showing the history of the metric values and the anomalies that were flagged. And for high SLA tests, we actually would prefer if they were just embedded directly in Amundsen itself, so people don't even need to click. You can just kind of look and get a rough idea of how the data set looks at any given time. This is what a chart would look like for a more interesting data set. You can see the red is where potential anomalies were flagged. So that would have contributed to a yellow or red badge on that given day. And that would be the trend line. And again, we're using just Markdown here because it's just levered. It's put directly in the programmatic descriptions as of right now. And this is what it looks like in the page. Unfortunately, it does seem like it should be made a little bit smaller because you currently have to scroll over. Yeah, and in terms of future work, we definitely want to develop some features so that people can request metrics directly in Amundsen. Currently, we're telling people just to use the request descriptions feature to do that, but probably would be more clear if we had a dedicated button for that. Another thing that we would like to have available is a link out to metric test report configuration directly in Amundsen so people can easily create new tests. And then finally, I don't know what the flow would look like, but obviously users will still manually find issues with data sets or perhaps resolve issues with data sets on their own. And it would be great if they could somehow give that input back into the data quality system so that they can either flag or resolve issues accordingly. Yeah, so that's what I got. Any questions?
Hey, Sam, it's Tamika. How are you rendering those charts? You said those are...
Yeah, so here's an example of what it would look like right here. So it's actually Markdown, and it's a link to a endpoint here that actually provides the chart. Yeah.
Okay.
So, hey Sam, this is Tao. So Yes, great thing. How do you run this test? Is like the data quality is it a Airflow task or Airflow deck that's been running daily or something in a given time?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I didn't work on the internals of InfraSight. My understanding is that they use a different scheduling mechanism. It is not Airflow, but I don't.
Okay, but some scheduling that is will show up the status sometimes.
Correct. That's right.
Cool. Thank you, Sam. This is really awesome. I wanted to just channel one last question from Marius, which you may have answered already, which is, what do you use to run those tests on data?
That's a great question. So it depends on the data source. So, we obviously, like every organization, use different data sources. So if it's a Hive table, we actually use Databricks for our Hive tables. So we would run the query on a Databricks cluster. If it's Redshift, we would run the query on a Redshift cluster. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, more or less. So you define the rules yourself. Like, what does it mean that the data is of good quality, for example?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So the metric collection is one thing, which would be queries that would be executed on the actual system itself, and then the tests that are on top of that. So if it's simple statistics, maybe you're like, oh, if the current value is 3 standard deviations from the mean, then that's bad. That's a failure. But yeah, that is human configurable. I'm not sure if I answered that.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, so if there's any more follow-up comments or questions, we can take that to Slack. Last up is Jorn, who's going to talk about OIDC connector with Amundsen.
Yeah. Now see if I can share my screen here. Okay. Share. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yep.
Cool. So this is the why that I think it was Adam or someone who about 2 months ago on Slack said regarding setting up OpenID Connect. I had hoped it was more plug and play. So it's basically trying to make it boring, OpenID Connect. So there are sort of 3 parts of this for me. The user experience for an end user. So this is where you will see me fumble the thing, I think. And then there's user experience, and then owner experience and developer experience. I want to sort of bring this into. So let's see if I can find the right here. So basically, login is now, this is set up with Microsoft, and I think I posted on the Slack channel a short clip of how it's set up with Google authentication as well. So I've set up my Microsoft login with my GitHub account on my personal account here. So a bit of fumbling here, and then hopefully I'll get a 2-factor thing here. Of course not. That goes. Boom. Yay! Pretty non-eventful. And then you see that it's me who's logged in. You can see that these are my bookmarks, personal bookmarks here. We can try removing this one. So before I had these 2, then if we go to my user, you should see I had only 1 bookmark here. So that's basically it. From an end user point of view, pretty uneventful. So that's, I guess, what an end user wants. it's something well known, trusted, the way they usually log in, etc. And then the owner, it should be the minimal stuff to do, read, etc. to set it up. So that's what I tried to accomplish. So currently, what we have in the documentation, the beautiful new documentation site set up by Tao. This is the original description from ING, from Verden, where there are a number of steps here. You have to do, configure some files, do some stuff. This is a bit newer, provided from Edmunds, with how you do the configuration. And I guess it's only currently working with Okta. And then you have to set up Kubernetes, a bit of configuration here that is only for Okta. And then you have to build the front end as well. So where I'm trying to take this is basically to new kind of documentation where you want to pick your provider. Is it Azure? Then you go here. This is the part we cannot really do anything about, but how do you configure stuff in Azure? And then this is a similar setup for Kubernetes, so you can actually just put that on the command line as an extra YAML file with your personal values that you provide, apart from the base template. And then a similar thing, I guess, for if you're going with Google. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, so that's basically it. And I guess then what we could still have in here is from if you want to do something not with these standard providers, then you are still in the developers area. So what I tried to make it more plug and play, basically boring. The developer experience around this is actually it's a stack of things. So in the bottom we have a Google library that is actually deprecated now. So I guess security is always something that is moving. Right now we have this is what we got, but at some point I guess we need to move away from that, and then someone has to go in and update stuff to enable Google and Azure login. I had to switch to a different OIDC Flask OIDC wrapper, which is an extended one with offline validation, because there's not a validation point with Google and Azure. It seems like it is with Keycloak and Okta. Then we go up one level in the stack, and then we have Verden's wrapper of that library, and then we go up one level more, where can't even it was Luke or someone who wrapped, basically took out a bunch of stuff from Verden's description and put it into Docker. Then we go up another level, and then we are at Kubernetes and Helm from Sam, etc., with his beautiful documentation. So yeah, that's basically it. Questions?
Cool. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jorn. Any questions?
Yeah, hi. I have a question. So, can the authentication be used to to selectively whitelist or blacklist any kind of metadata API. So let's say my use case is that I want to prevent people from using the front end to add tags. So is that something that can be done through this OpenID Connect layer?
It's something that can be added at some point. It's not there at the moment, but I guess it's sitting somewhere in the roadmap. If you go to the roadmap page in the documentation.
Cool, thank you. We're at the hour, so we can conclude here. If there are any other follow-on questions we could do in Slack. Just want to say thank you for all the presenters who took the time to prepare and share this amazing content. And then if you have suggestions on something you would like to present, just message on the Slack channel. We will have community meetings every first Thursday of the month from here on. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and we will see you in a month.
Thank you.